The April morning had brought unseasonable warmth to London when the desperate telegram arrived at Baker Street. A young woman lay dead in Mayfair, killed by what appeared to be her own perfume. The Metropolitan Police were baffled, and Inspector Lestrade requested Holmes's immediate attendance. As I read the brief message, I saw Holmes's eyes light with that particular interest that presaged an intriguing case. Before I continue with this remarkable case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support allows us to keep bringing these mysteries to you. Now, let us proceed. Within the hour, we stood in the elegant townhouse on Berkeley Square, where Miss Caroline Ashford had died the previous evening. The drawing room still held the lingering scent of expensive French perfume, mixed with something far more sinister, the bitter almond smell that Holmes immediately identified as prussic acid, more commonly known as cyanide. Lestrade met us at the door, his face grave. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming so quickly. This is the strangest death I've encountered in 20 years with the Yard. The young lady applied perfume before going to the theatre last evening. Within minutes, she collapsed in convulsions and died before the doctor could arrive. The perfume bottle sits there on her dressing table. French crystal, expensive as anything. But it killed her as surely as a bullet." Holmes moved immediately to the dressing table, where an ornate crystal bottle sat among an array of cosmetics and toiletries. He did not touch it, but leaned close, inhaling carefully. Prussic acid, mixed expertly into what was originally Guerlain's Jicky. An expensive perfume indeed. "Tell me, Inspector, who had access to this room?" "That's just it, Mr. Holmes. The house has been locked up tight. Miss Ashford lived here with her widowed mother, Mrs. Margaret Ashford, who is currently under a physician's care, quite overcome with grief. They employed 3 servants, a cook, a housemaid, and the lady's personal maid, Simmons. All have been with the family for years. There's also a younger sister, Miss Elizabeth Ashford, who was out at a musical recital when Caroline died. And Miss Caroline's social connections? Any gentlemen callers, business disputes, enemies of any kind?" Lestrade consulted his notebook. "She was engaged to be married to Mr. Robert Thornton, a barrister of excellent reputation. By all accounts, it was a love match. He's downstairs now, absolutely devastated. Besides him, she had no shortage of admirers. She was considered one of the season's beauties. But enemies? Everyone we've spoken to describes her as kind, generous, beloved by all who knew her." Holmes examined the perfume bottle with his magnifying glass, studying every detail without touching the poisoned contents. "The bottle has not been opened recently except by the victim herself. The seal was intact until she used it. Yet someone managed to introduce a lethal dose of cyanide into this expensive French perfume. A most ingenious method of murder. Perfume is applied to pulse points, absorbed quickly through the skin, and the victim would die within minutes, with no way to reverse the process. I shuddered at the calculated cruelty of such a method. But Holmes, how could someone poison a sealed bottle? That, my dear Watson, is precisely what we must discover. Inspector, I should like to interview everyone in the household, beginning with the victim's maid. I also need to know when this perfume was purchased and by whom. The lady's maid, a woman named Sarah Simmons, was brought to us. She was perhaps 40 years of age, red-eyed from weeping, and clearly devoted to her late mistress. Holmes questioned her with his characteristic directness while maintaining a tone of sympathy. Miss Simmons, when did Miss Caroline acquire this particular bottle of perfume? Just last week, sir. It arrived as a gift, beautifully wrapped with a card. Miss Caroline was so pleased. It was her favorite scent, you see. She'd used up her previous bottle. A gift? From whom? The card said it was from her fiancé, Mr. Thornton. A pre-wedding gift, the note said. Miss Caroline was touched by the gesture. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Do you have this card? I believe Miss Caroline kept it in her desk. She saved all Mr. Thornton's notes and letters. We examined the desk and found a small card in elegant script. To my dearest Caroline, that you may wear this on our wedding day and remind me always of this happy time. With all my love, Robert. The handwriting was firm and masculine, the paper expensive. And did you see the package arrive? Holmes asked Simmons. No, sir. It was delivered while I was out with Mrs. Ashford. We returned to find it on the hall table where the post is always left. Miss Caroline opened it that afternoon and was delighted. Holmes requested an interview with Mr. Robert Thornton, the fiancé. He was shown into the drawing room, a tall, well-built man of perhaps 30, his face showing the ravages of shock and grief. His hands trembled as Holmes questioned him. Mr. Thornton, I understand you sent Miss Caroline a bottle of perfume as a gift? The man looked bewildered. I sent her no such thing, Mr. Holmes. I sent her flowers last week, as I do every week, but no perfume. I would never presume. She had very particular tastes in such things. Where did you get such an idea? Holmes showed him the card. Thornton's face went white. This is not my handwriting. Someone has forged my hand and my sentiments. This is monstrous. Who would do such a thing? That is what we must determine. Tell me, Mr. Thornton, did anyone know Miss Caroline's favorite perfume? Everyone who knew her socially would know. She wore it constantly. It was her signature scent, as they said. Guerlain's Jicky. She special ordered it from Paris through Fortnum and Mason. Holmes spent the next hour examining every aspect of the household. He interviewed the younger sister, Elizabeth, a pale girl of 19 who seemed genuinely devastated by her sister's death. He spoke with Mrs. Ashford, though the poor woman was so overcome with grief and laudanum that little useful information could be gained. He examined the servants' quarters, the delivery records, and even the kitchen where the cook prepared meals. Finally, he requested a private conversation with the housemaid, a young woman named Mary Fletcher, who had been with the family only 6 months. She was nervous and uncertain as Holmes questioned her. Miss Fletcher, you receive the post and deliveries when they arrive? Yes, sir, usually. Though last week, when the perfume came, I was upstairs changing the linens. Mrs. Ashford was out with Simmons, and I believe Miss Elizabeth signed for the package. I see. And do you recall anything unusual about the delivery? The girl hesitated. Well, sir, it wasn't delivered by the usual postal service. It was a private messenger, a boy of perhaps 14 or 15, wearing plain clothes. He said he had a special delivery for Miss Caroline from a gentleman. Did you see this boy's face clearly? Not really, sir. He wore a cap pulled low, and it was getting on towards dusk. He left the package and departed quickly. Holmes thanked her and turned to me. Watson, we have here a carefully planned murder disguised as a gift. Someone obtained a bottle of Guerlain's Jicky, expertly opened it, introduced a lethal dose of prussic acid, resealed it so that the victim would suspect nothing, forged a card in the fiancé's handwriting, and arranged for it to be delivered by an untraceable messenger. This speaks of considerable planning and knowledge of the victim's habits. But who would have such motive? I asked. By all accounts, Miss Caroline was beloved. Beloved, perhaps, but also wealthy. Inspector, tell me about the family finances. Lestrade consulted his notes. The Ashford family is quite well off. The late Mr. Ashford left his entire estate to his wife, who has complete control of it during her lifetime. Upon her death, it was to be divided equally between the two daughters. But if one daughter predeceased the mother, her share would pass to the surviving sister. Holmes's expression grew grim. How much are we discussing? Approximately £40,000, plus the house and various properties. Each daughter stood to inherit £20,000. If one died before the mother, the survivor would inherit everything. And Miss Elizabeth Ashford, where was she when the perfume was delivered? At home, Mr. Holmes. She signed for the package herself, according to the household records. Holmes turned to me. Watson, prussic acid has a distinctive, bitter almond smell. Yet it was mixed into perfume, a substance already strongly scented. This required someone with knowledge of chemistry and access to the poison. It also required someone who knew Miss Caroline's habits intimately, enough to be certain she would use the perfume immediately upon receiving it. The younger sister? I ventured, though the thought was horrifying. Let us speak with her again, more carefully this time. Miss Elizabeth Ashford was summoned once more. She entered with apparent reluctance, her eyes downcast. Holmes began gently, but with purpose. Miss Ashford, I understand you received the package containing the perfume. Yes. I was in the drawing room when the messenger arrived. The maid was busy, so I signed for it. And what did you do with it? I placed it on the hall table for Caroline, as is our custom with deliveries. Then I went to prepare for my recital that evening. Did you examine the package? Only briefly. It was addressed to Caroline, not to me. And the messenger, did you see his face? For the first time, Elizabeth hesitated. Not clearly. It was a boy, I think. He wore a cap. Holmes leaned forward. Miss Ashford, where were you educated? The sudden change of topic seemed to startle her. At home, mostly. We had governesses. Why do you ask? Did any of these governesses teach you chemistry or the natural sciences? Her face paled. My last governess, Miss Patterson, was quite knowledgeable in such subjects. She taught me botany and basic chemistry. But I don't see, and where is Miss Patterson now? She left our employ 6 months ago. I believe she returned to her family in Scotland. Holmes stood and began pacing. Miss Ashford, I put it to you that you obtained prussic acid through your chemistry studies, that you opened a bottle of your sister's favorite perfume, carefully introduced the poison, resealed it, forged a card in Mr. Thornton's handwriting, and arranged for its delivery by hiring a street boy to play messenger. You did this because you stood to inherit a fortune if your sister predeceased your mother, and you could not wait for nature to take its course. Elizabeth Ashford went white as marble. That's absurd. I loved my sister. How dare you accuse me of such a monstrous thing? Then explain to me, Holmes said coldly, why your reticule, which I observed on the hall table, contains a receipt from a chemical supply shop in Cheapside, dated 2 weeks ago, listing prussic acid among the purchases. Why your writing desk contains practice attempts at forging Mr. Thornton's signature. Why the housemaid saw you speaking with a street boy the morning of the delivery, giving him instructions and payment. The girl's composure crumbled. She sank into a chair, her face in her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen so quickly. I thought she might use only a little at first. But perhaps she would grow ill but recover. I never imagined. The confession poured out. A tale of jealousy, resentment, and greed. Elizabeth had lived in her beautiful sister's shadow all her life. Caroline had all the admirers, all the attention, and was set to marry well, while Elizabeth remained overlooked. The prospect of inheriting everything if Caroline died had grown from a distant possibility into an obsession. She had studied chemistry texts, obtained the poison under a false name, and executed her terrible plan with meticulous care. But she had miscalculated the lethality of her dose, and the speed with which perfume, applied to pulse points, could deliver poison into the bloodstream. Caroline had died within minutes of applying the poisoned perfume, far too quickly for any antidote to be administered. Inspector Lestrade arrested Elizabeth Ashford on the spot. As she was led away, still weeping, Mrs. Ashford collapsed completely and had to be attended by her physician. The household was thrown into even greater turmoil than the original death had caused, for now they had to grapple with both murder and the betrayal by one family member of another. Mr. Thornton stood in stunned silence as the truth emerged. "To think," he said finally, "that she sat with us at dinner, offered sympathy for Caroline's death, all while knowing she had killed her own sister. It's beyond comprehension." "I fear," Holmes replied, "that human nature is capable of terrible things when jealousy and greed combine with opportunity. Miss Elizabeth was not naturally evil, but she allowed her darker impulses to overcome her better nature, and the result was tragedy. The trial, which took place 3 months later, was one of the most sensational in recent memory. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of premeditation. The forged card, the chemical purchases, the carefully planned delivery. Elizabeth Ashford's defense argued for diminished capacity due to long-standing jealousy that had affected her mental state. But the jury was not persuaded. She was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, though this was later commuted to life imprisonment due to her youth and the public's sympathy that arose for someone so young destroying her own life through a moment of terrible judgment. Mrs. Ashford never recovered from the double blow of losing one daughter to murder and the other to the hangman's rope. She died within the year, some said, of a broken heart. The Ashford fortune, ironically, passed to distant relatives who had never expected such an inheritance. As Holmes and I returned to Baker Street after testifying at the trial, I reflected on the case. A terrible business, Holmes. That a young woman could murder her own sister out of jealousy and greed. It speaks to the worst of human nature. Indeed, Watson. Yet consider the method. Poison concealed in perfume. It required intelligence, knowledge, and planning. Had Elizabeth Ashford directed those same qualities toward legitimate pursuits, she might have achieved much. Instead, she allowed envy to corrupt her, and the result was ruin for all concerned. The perfume itself, such an elegant and feminine method of murder. One would almost call it poetic, were it not so deadly. Prussic acid is among the fastest acting of poisons, Holmes observed. Mixed into perfume and applied to the pulse points of the neck and wrists, it enters the bloodstream immediately. The victim would feel the first symptoms within seconds: difficulty breathing, a racing heart, then collapse and death. There would be no time for an antidote, no possibility of calling for help. It is, from a purely technical standpoint, nearly the perfect murder weapon, were it not for the fact that the symptoms and smell of prussic acid are so distinctive that any competent physician would recognize them immediately. And the forgery of the card, that was clever as well. Clever, but not perfect. Mr. Thornton's handwriting has certain characteristics that Elizabeth failed to reproduce accurately. Had I examined the original card more closely alongside genuine examples of his hand, I would have spotted the forgery immediately. But she counted on the card being accepted at face value, and it nearly was. That evening, as I wrote up my notes on the case, I reflected on how the seemingly innocent act of applying perfume, something thousands of women did every day, had been perverted into an instrument of death. The crystal bottle that should have held beauty and elegance had instead contained murder. It was a sobering reminder that evil could hide in the most unexpected places, disguised in the most attractive packages. Holmes spent the evening analyzing the chemical composition of the poisoned perfume, curious about how Elizabeth had managed to mix the prussic acid so thoroughly, but it was not immediately apparent. The secret, he explained, lies in the base notes of the perfume itself. Jicky contains coumarin, which has its own strong scent that partially masked the bitter almond smell of the prussic acid. Someone less familiar with perfume chemistry might have chosen a lighter, more floral scent, where the poison would have been more obvious. Elizabeth showed considerable sophistication in her selection. Yet all her cleverness came to nothing in the end, I observed, as it always does when applied to evil purposes. Crime is invariably short-sighted, Watson. It sees only the immediate goal, in this case, inheriting a fortune, without considering the inevitable consequences. Elizabeth Ashford will spend the rest of her life in prison, haunted by the memory of what she did to her own sister. No amount of money could justify that burden of guilt. The case of the perfume that killed remained in my notes as one of the most chilling examples of domestic murder I had encountered. Not because of any exotic poison or impossible circumstances, but because it showed how ordinary objects, a crystal perfume bottle, a forged note, a hired messenger, could be twisted into instruments of fratricide. The tragedy was complete. One sister dead, the other imprisoned, a mother dead of grief, a fiancé robbed of his future happiness. All because jealousy and greed had found an outlet in chemical knowledge and careful planning. Years later, I learned that Elizabeth Ashford had died in prison, having never spoken to anyone after her conviction. She spent her remaining years in complete silence, refusing all visitors and rejecting all offers of spiritual counsel. Some said she had gone mad with guilt, others that she had simply withdrawn completely from a world she could no longer face. Either way, the perfume that killed had claimed not one victim, but two. One by poison, the other by the weight of her own terrible deed. As I filed away my notes that evening, Holmes took up his violin and played a melancholy air that seemed to capture the sadness of the entire affair. "Beauty can conceal death, Watson," he remarked between movements. "A crystal bottle, an elegant fragrance, a loving gesture, all twisted into murder. It reminds us that we must always look beneath the surface, question what seems obvious, and remember that appearances can be fatally deceiving." The perfume that killed would remain as testament to both human ingenuity and human wickedness, proof that the same intelligence that could create beauty and solve mysteries could also conceive and execute the most intimate of betrayals. And in that duality lay the eternal challenge that Holmes devoted his life to addressing, using the power of rational thought and careful observation to unmask evil, regardless of how attractively it might be disguised.